S&I in the current policing plan, and also which deliver against our strategic outcomes for policing. Today's seminar has been talked about, the topic has been talked about in each of the seminars, and it's an issue which is very much at the heart of public debate and also very much at the forefront of all of our minds, and it's around money and resources. Doing more with less, and how do police services optimise their resources to best effect. We're delighted to be joined by Matt Power from Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and the Fire and Rescue Services. Matt has recently taken up this position and brings extensive experience to the role, so we're very much looking forward to hearing his perspective. We will, as usual, have time for questions, and I'll be asking the Board Chair, Anne Connolly, and the Chief Constable to join the panel along with Matt to take questions from the floor. We do plan to finish up at 1:45, it's a lunchtime seminar, and in terms of practical arrangements, we have no fire drill planned for today, so if the alarm goes off, I would ask you just to make your way out of the building, following directions from our staff. Also, just to make you aware that photography will be taken today at this event. If you do not wish to be included, could you please let a member of our staff know? And as I mentioned, we're also streaming this event live today on the YouTube channel. You're very welcome to make comments on Twitter using the hashtags NIPBLive, Policing Matters, and tagging us at NI Policing Board. Thank you, and we'll now see a short film to set the scene for today.
Austerity is a term that the public and all our public services are now very familiar with. Services have had to take measures and make choices about service delivery in order to balance budgets across the sectors. Policing has been no different. The efficiency and effectiveness of the police depends on them having the resources they need to prevent crime, catch criminals, and keep communities safe. Policing and partner agencies are facing an unprecedented increase in demand generated by complex social problems such as mental health related incidents, missing children, homelessness and substance misuse. And they have to prioritise their resources to help those at greatest risk of harm. Funding reductions across the sectors mean services have been reduced, and policing as a 24/7 service is often left to respond to issues that need to be dealt with by other professionals. In addition, there is now a greater and welcome willingness to report previously hidden crimes, such as child sexual abuse and domestic violence, which are often more complex to prevent and investigate. The shift from traditional to technological crime also presents new challenges and demands for policing. Understanding demand on policing is vital to ensure that the right resources are in the right place to provide the right level of policing now and for the future. Policing services need to evaluate the potential impacts of wider societal and environmental changes on their work and make plans to ensure the service is fit for purpose. It's important to make the most of the resources available and explore new and different ways to maximise those. We'll now hear from Matt Power on the challenge of doing more with less and how police services can optimise their resources to best effect.
Thank you. I would just like to introduce Matt Power. Matt is Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, and since last year that remit also extended to include Fire and Rescue Services. Matt's role entails overseeing police services in the London region, non-home office services, and inspecting counter-terrorism policing and organised crime policing. Matt, you're very welcome to the Policing Board, and I understand you're going to give us a short presentation on optimising resources to best effect. Thank you very much.
Amanda, thanks very much. Lovely to be here. I think this is day one for me as the HMI responsible for PSNI. I'm a volunteer, which is something for 30 years in the armed forces, you're always told never volunteer for anything. And I volunteered when the previous HMI went off to the College of Policing I, like a greedy bird picking up the carcass of a dead animal, looked at his portfolio and said, the one bit I really want of that is PSNI, the rest of it, the new HMI can take over. But I think this is a fascinating force with fascinating challenges, and every force in the UK will tell you they're unique, but there aren't many whose claim is quite as strong as we are over here. I've got a bit of a presentation to go through, and it's a little bit generic about what we're seeing in HMIC and what we've seen in police forces generally across the UK. I think in questions we can talk maybe a little bit more detail about some of the questions this raises about value for money and optimising resources to best effect. But it's something that we as an organisation are acutely aware of. I've been in our organisation now for about 18 months, and that has really coincided, I think, with a growing recognition that the financial challenge and the resource pressure that policing across the UK is under has become an ever more sensitive, slightly totemic question. And so I get asked about it quite a lot. I remember being in a forum very similar to this with the London Assembly, when one of the members there asked me, if I may, a rather difficult question to answer, which was, has the Met got the resources it needs to keep Londoners safe? And if only that were a simple question to ask. It's a very complicated question to answer for a whole host of reasons. Perhaps we can explore some of those in questions, but I thought I'd just go through some of the background about what it is we look at. This is what I'll cover, what we've said in the state of policing. What we're introducing across policing in the UK is a concept called force management statements, which will tell you much more about how to optimise resources. I'll come back to those. What we do in our standard inspections, the PEEL inspection. PEEL stands for Police Efficiency, Effectiveness and Legitimacy. We apply that approach by statute across all the forces in England and Wales. We apply it by choice because it makes sense, with some adaptations in Northern Ireland. I'll then talk about the new approach we're taking. We've been doing PEEL for 2 or 3 years now. We've decided it's time to make some improvements, and actually those improvements we're going to make largely reflect the pragmatic, sensible approach we've taken over the last couple of years in Northern Ireland. So that's good news from here, and I'll tell you what we're doing and what we're planning to do with PSNI over the next year or so. I'm in this awful position now, I'm sure lots of you are like this, where your site will work at some levels. I have no idea what that says. Yes. That's what we said in the State of Policing report. It is too easy to say that policing just hasn't got enough funds, because we still see huge variations in the degree of efficiency and the way forces optimise their resources across 43 forces. And one of the important things in having an inspectorate like ours that looks at all 43 forces is we are able to highlight best practice and draw attention to those forces that have generally optimised their resources. And you will never see, a force that is brilliant at everything it does, but you'll see gems of genius in every single force, and one of our jobs is to highlight those, make sure everybody else is aware of them and picks up on it. But I think proper forward planning is something that we don't always see. And this is not, I'm not talking about PSNI now because I don't know enough about the force, I'm just learning. But in some of the forces I'm responsible for, I've seen leadership teams who are absolutely great at operating, actually pretty good leaders, but the management and the planning in finances, in structures, in what they do with their personnel is not necessarily as good as it could be. And I think if I was the Chief Constable here, among the many headaches that he has to deal with, I think one of the biggest challenges is all about your workforce. Your biggest resource is your workforce. It's the thing you spend most money on. And providing a workforce that is properly recruited, trained, continually trained across their career to keep pace with the sort of specialist work that we're seeing more and more of in policing is a real headache for forces. And one that, as we said at the start there, we see varying success with. Force management statements are something that we're asking forces to do, and that's what it is. It's an annual statement of how much money they've got, what their demand is like this year and what they're predicting for future years, the state of their assets, mostly but not exclusively people, and what plans they have for improving efficiency and effectiveness. Now we're asking this because it's going to help us inspect forces more smartly actually. We'll get a lot of benefit out of it, and here's a payoff for the forces we inspect, it will enable us to have a slightly lighter footprint when we come and do the field work. So it should be something that all well-run enterprises ought to have this kind of data to hand. They ought to have it as part of their planning. If they share it with us, then it enables us to have a much lighter footprint when we come and march all over your force headquarters and ask all sorts of awkward questions. At the moment, in the last couple of years, we've done 3 different inspections every year. Not over here, but on the mainland, we've done an efficiency inspection, an effectiveness inspection, and a legitimacy inspection. And those are the key questions that we ask in efficiency. Do you understand what your demand is? How well do you use your resources to meet that demand? And do you understand what that demand is going to be like in the future, what your resources are going to be in the future, and how you're going to match it to? It's a really simple thing to put on paper. Obviously, the nature of the kind of evidence we look for is a lot more complicated than that, and saying it as boldly as that is the easiest thing in the world, translating that into a plan that the force can develop is obviously that much harder. In effectiveness, those are the 4 questions we ask. What are you like at preventing crime and dealing with ASB? What's the quality of your investigations like, and how do you deal with reoffending? How do you protect vulnerable people? How do you analyse? Do you understand what vulnerability looks like, and how do you have plans for dealing with that? And lastly, what are your specialist capabilities and and serious and organised crime is the 4th one. So those are the 4 questions we tend to ask. The last time we inspected in PSNI, we didn't ask the 3rd of those questions. We'd asked that the year before, and we'd been really quite impressed with what we saw, so we chose not to look at that this year. Last time we inspected on this, but we'll come back to it again soon. And then on legitimacy, we asked 3 questions in simple terms. How do you treat the public? How do you make sure your workforce behaves itself? And thirdly, do you actually look after your workforce? Because there's a lot of academic research that says you can draw the lines between how well you look after your workforce and then how the workforce will engage with the public in the same kind of ethical, honest, responsible way. So those are the 3 questions we asked. And across 43 forces in the UK, we get a really broad range of results, all the way on each individual of those questions from outstanding to inadequate. And we work really hard at using the same criteria so we judge fairly. 2 abbreviations there, a risk-based approach and integrated peer assessments. So rather than have those individual assessments, what we're moving to in the mainland is more like what we've done over here. We'll have 1 assessment a year. We won't ask questions if we know that they're good. If they've been fantastic for a couple of years, we'll have a much lighter touch, and we might only ask the questions where we think there's greater risk. And 1 assessment a year and 1 overall assessment for how good we think the force is. We've already tested it once. We tested it this year, had a big reduction in our workload, had a big reduction in the workload for the forces we inspected. Pretty much agreed everyone thinks it's a good idea. But that's roughly what we've done over here anyway. What are we doing in Northern Ireland? We will publish next month our efficiency and effectiveness reports for last year. In March we come back to inspect on efficiency and that question about vulnerability that we skipped last year. We'll come back to that. That will then get published early summer. And then from September on, I think my ambition, and I hope it's reasonably widely shared, is that we'll just use that single inspection once a year based on risk approach that we've kind of developed over here. When we instigate it in the UK forces, we should do exactly the same here. And that way, while recognising that there are some serious and significant differences, it should provide you all with a pretty good yardstick about where you are in comparison to the UK forces. our statutory responsibility is for the efficiency and effectiveness of every year of all 43 Home Office forces in the UK. Actually, there are forces, one of mine is the British Transport Police, who have chosen to have an inspection regime that mirrors this as near as possible, because while accepting that British Transport Police is very different to a county force, it's really quite useful to see where they are in comparison with the broader landscape of policing. So that's our plan for this year. I'll shut up there. Very open to questions as when we form the panel, but if there are any difficult ones, can I ask them that you direct them to the Chief Constable?
Well, thank you very much. And I get the tip around the questions. I would like to invite the board chair, the Chief Constable, and yourself just to come up and join the panel. Chief Constable, I'm going to turn to you first, not least because Matt has set you up with a perfect question. He said the most difficult question for a Chief Constable would be, has the PSNI got the resources to keep people safe? And it's not an easy answer. So I thought we would kick off maybe with your perspective on that and maybe what we've heard from Matt this morning.
Well,
Something here, or just, yeah, good to go. Well, obviously what Matt has been explaining to the wider group are things that are sort of day-to-day business for us, because we've been engaged in the HMI inspection regime for a couple of years in this format. We welcome it. It's a little bit actually like the policing board was functioning. It's not always a comfortable process. It's not always a comfortable process, but actually real good comes out of it in terms of improvement, and that has been our experience. So we await the results of last year's inspection, but I understand that it will show some improvement on the previous year. So I think the work of the HMI as part of the accountability infrastructure through into the policing board and the Department of Justice is to be welcomed, and it's good for policing. It's good for communities because it enhances the performance of their police service. On that big difficult question about effectively do PSNI have enough resources to keep people safe, this is it's a really difficult question because it's not there's no binary yes/no answer to that. Some of this is about dealing with public expectations and about political leaders and communities getting clarity about what they want from their police service. And of course, for those with political power, for them, it's the dilemma of carving up an ever-shrinking pot of public money between things like health, education, the broader justice family, and within justice, police service, against probation, prisons, and the court service, and so on. So I'll always make the pitch for the maximum amount of resources for policing, because that's the better service that we can deliver to communities. And if we put that to good use and with enough assurance overlaid onto our use of the resources through the board, through the HMIC, and through the Department of Justice and Public Accounts Committee and all the other scrutineers, then that allows us to say more definitively that what we're doing to keep people safe. But this isn't a binary yes/no answer. I do think there is a reality that we're going to have to address. Yes, police needs to be as effective and as efficient as it possibly can, and the board's here to hold us to account on that, and the HMIC have a role in that. But there is also something with dealing with public expectations. So in the last 10 years, for example, the policing budget has been cut by 38%. In the 3.5 years since I've been Chief Constable, there's been £144 million taken out of the police budget. I haven't volunteered to give up a single penny of that money, but I am honoured to be the chief constable, but I'm just a public servant, and my job is to work with what I've been given, to show that I'm doing the best with what I've been given, to constantly strive for efficiencies, for doing things better. And I think the team that I'm blessed to work with have done a really good job in that, both from the sort of finance and accounting side with Mark McNaughton, right through to the police officers in the team who have been trying to find ways of delivering the same or even better service with significantly less money. So last year, there was a sort of a sigh of relief in some quarters that we just had an additional 20 million taken out of the budget. That is a huge amount of money. It's 20 million pounds that we spend per annum on neighbourhood policing teams, for example. So that goes out. We still want to keep neighbourhood policing. In fact, we're engaged in a review of our arrangements for delivery of local services, and we would like, listening to the board and the focus groups, we would like to enhance that neighbourhood policing footprint again if we can, by tweaking the model. But the current cost of neighbourhood policing in this jurisdiction is £20 million a year, and last year it was almost, because there was some restraint exercised on the cut that policing got, it was almost a sigh of relief that it was just 20 million. To try to give that some sort of context, that is the cost of our current neighbourhood policing effort. So I guess it's a bit of a continuum. I mean, how much money people want to invest, responsibility on us to use that wisely, efficiently and effectively. But actually this isn't a clear-cut yes-no answer, but is that sufficient to keep people safe? There's a wee bit of dealing with public and political expectations, and there's a bit too for all of us to recognise the huge dilemma that politicians have in carving up the ever-shrinking pot of public money.
Okay, thank you very much. Chair, if I bring you in a minute. Now, Chair, if I could just ask you perhaps, maybe from a board perspective, the Chief has mentioned the efficiency and effectiveness and responsibility he has, and obviously as a policing board that's an expectation that you have, that he manages that budget. But he does so in a very different context from England and Wales, where they're able to carry money forward, they can raise money, and in a sense probably the sense of setting a budget on a year-to-year basis for an organisation the size of PSNI. Has the board a view on that or a role to play in relation to that?
I'm not quite sure what the board would, full view would be in that, but I think there's a very clear way that we need to move forward. I think it's absolutely crazy to expect anyone to plan for 3 to 5 years, but say here's your money for a year, and by the way, if you haven't it all spent by Christmas, we'd expect you to surrender some of it. And as you've said, the PSNI, like other public services, can't raise on the rate. They can't, which is one of the patent recommendations, they can't carry the reserves forward, and they can't, income generation is limited. So I think there does need to be, along with forward planning, there needs to be imaginative ways to fund that. And it's not enough just to say the budget may be this for 3 years. And it's for every public service, because what you get is the money is then unwisely spent come March, April, or March, February usually. People are starting to buy chairs and desks and things to use the budget. Because if they don't use their budget, it'll be taken back, and that'll be based on what they'll get for the next year. So to me it's crazy to say there might be a programme of government, hopefully there will be this new programme for government, outcome-based work, but not to look at how we fund. I think it's just absolutely crazy. I'll be told there's all kinds of rules and regulations, but if it can be done in other jurisdictions, it can be done here. And we really do need to have a more imaginative way of funding, particularly services that have access to such huge sums. That doesn't mean we let them off the hook with how they use the money, because I think we would have very strong views that there is a need for more systemic change and more challenge in PSNI, and we do have discussions about that, and not just tinkering at the edges. But there again, if your budget's on a yearly basis, that's exactly what you'll be forced to do. So I think there is a big issue there for public services generally, as well as PSNI.
Okay, thank you. Matt, would you like to come in? I know you want to come in maybe on the point that the Chief made, but also on that one.
It's wider. We've been commissioned by the Home Secretary to do a national, UK-wide thematic look at the way policing, not just forces but the National Crime Agency and other law enforcement agencies, deal with fraud. I'm going to tell you, as a wild guess, and I don't know this, but I would suspect that fraud in Northern Ireland is underreported, under-investigated. There's much more of it than ever comes to the police's attention. And there are some occasionally quite vulnerable victims who end up as having their lives distressed or occasionally ruined by being victims of fraud. And again, I'm not a career police officer, but it seems to me that over the last few years there have been a number of these, I'm not saying fashionable crimes, but a number of crimes that has become more and more apparent, were much more widespread than perhaps was thought, were doing much more damage to society than was thought. I'm thinking of domestic abuse, of modern slavery, and online child abuse, for example. And every time one of these comes up, and I suspect fraud will be the next one, then that's an extra priority for policing to take on board. And this is why I have enormous sympathy for Chief Constables, because what your Chief Constable, indeed no other Chief Constable, has, and actually if you could equate it to my career in the Navy, it's what the Armed Forces did have, was a view from government about how good they're expected to be. So the government doesn't expect the armed forces to take on Russia in a head-to-head fight and win. It expects the armed forces to be part of a coalition that might take on a range of competitors. And the analysis about how much we spend on defence is set on assumptions such as how big that contribution might be made by the UK, how long might it last, etc., etc. And so there's almost an agreement with this is what we pay for and this is what we get. But with policing there isn't. So every time we think of one of these new areas that needs investigation, and by the way, there don't seem to be many crime types that were traditionally investigated that have either evaporated or reduced so much to compensate for it, then it's another demand on the police without any public debate about how good we expect the police to be at it. Now that's not an excuse for being efficient, of course it's not. But what it does mean is that in questions like, how safe can you be, it's very difficult to answer because there isn't an agreed tolerance for how many victims of fraud is okay. And clearly, if you double the budget for PS&I, you'll get a significantly better service and victims will be better looked after, and that degree of tolerance for fraud or whatever it may be will end up being lower. But we as an inspectorate can't judge on that. All we can say is, within the budget you've got, are you using it as well as you might reasonably expected to do? What we can't say is, you've got the right amount of fraud that's going undetected or not. That's a difficult tightrope for us to walk, but we try and do it as fairly as we can.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to turn just to open up to the floor if we have any questions. We've one at the back and then one just here in the middle from Linda. Johnny, if you want to go first.
Thanks. Sort of, obviously, very examples of doing more for less.
I'll come back to we see lots. So there are lots of innovative ways of using people. Forces have used staff very innovatively. In some respects, and some they haven't. I'll give an example. The Met, it is well known. There is I won't say it's a political football. That's the wrong phrase to use, but the actual number of uniformed officers in the Met is often discussed in ways where it becomes politically quite contentious. In other forces that haven't had that as a background, they've been able to use police staff more imaginatively, PCSOs more imaginatively, because there isn't this kind of totemic figure of how many uniformed officers are on the streets. And so we see widely different approaches to using police staff as just one example. There are also collaborations. We look quite widely at collaborations. It's not something that's easy to see for PS&I, but the degree of collaboration between mainland forces varies enormously. I asked a question in my sort of introduction to the force this morning about how much training is done here in Northern Ireland and how much training do you share with the mainland, and I understand there are reasons why it's significantly more problematical to share training for this force than it would be for Cambridgeshire, who is surrounded by other medium-sized, similar forces. So collaborations, use of staff, shift patterns, demand, responses to demand. We see variation in all of those. There's no right answer, and we don't impose one. You know, there are. We'd never dream of saying this is the right way to do it. There's only one way to do it. You don't fall in without being able to criticise you. We just want to be reassured that whatever model has been chosen for a degree of logic, and is producing the results the public would expect.
Thank you, Matt. Chief Constable, you wanted to comment on this?
I think that's a good question, Johnny, that we're constantly challenging ourselves about. There's two questions of really about we keep making this assertion that we need to stop doing some things that are not critical, but actually trying to find things to stop doing is really challenging, because the public, customers, citizens, victims, whoever you want to label people that we deliver a service to, have expectations, and in terms of confidence in policing, we try to meet those. But if you look, I mentioned a 38% reduction in the budget over the last 10 years. We've reduced the amount of money we spend by 38% and have reduced the workforce by 19%. So it's a sort of a 2-for-1 ratio there. At the same time, a number of crime types are absolutely soaring. Well, they're probably not increasing significantly. Reporting is increasing. So it wasn't that long ago that we had, for example, one rape reported to us every 2 days on average. Now, on average, we have 2 rapes reported every day, so it's a 4-fold increase. And there's lots of crime types like that. The amount of, not even just crime types, but the amount of work and energy that we put now into the management of sex offenders, for example, with partner agencies, but that whole safeguarding piece is much more developed, which is really significant in terms of keeping people safe. But it's very hard to quantify, because the amount of prevention work is always difficult to find any beans in there to count. But it's really important that we do it, and we know that there are very powerful anecdotes of where that has been hugely successful. So I think there is evidence, but we're not complacent. I think that there's plenty more that we can be doing to squeeze further efficiencies out. But we are also getting to a point, to be honest, and we use this forum to deal with expectations. A lot of the low-hanging fruit, a lot of the sort of trimming of the edges has been done, and we are now at the point of needing this year and next year, as best as we can guess it, because we still don't have a proper budget, as best as we can estimate, to be starting to eat into police officer headcount. And of course, that's just one very binary measure of our capability, because we need to get the whole police staff and officer workforce mixed right, and other ways of building capabilities around technology and so on. But we are at a point where we're going to have to start chipping away at the police officer headcount, and just giving that as an indicator that of the point that we've got to.
Okay, just on that point, because Matt mentioned an issue that's come up time and time again, and it's around PCSOs and the use of volunteers. Is it part of the plans for PSNI going forward, or is there any thought been given to that in terms of how you mobilise community support as well as manage public expectation?
Yeah, that has been on and off the agenda. In fact, Barbara was just discussing with us the other morning this notion of special constables and where we were with all of that, and volunteers with some degree of police powers. It was on the table, PCSOs as well, 10 years ago, and then we pulled off largely for concerns that some of the political parties had. Linked into all of that is the whole piece around a legislative basis and accountability, and volunteers who are volunteers and are not employees. How do they fit into the accountability mechanisms? What's the role of the ombudsman, and ultimately through me through to the board? We think that that is a capability that we need to find a way of harnessing and using. We do have volunteers, by the way, but they tend to be in non-service delivery roles. They're in back office space where all that accountability risk is much less. But to have that formalised, some of the work that NCA are doing around sort of special constables online and so on is where we'd like to get to. But it would need legislation, it would need political support, we would need to iron out all of the accountability challenges around it. But it's not a reason not to do it, it just means that we need to work with the board on, is that what we want to do? collaboratively, and if so, how do we get through it? But it is one of the, we've come up with a list of sort of innovative ideas for consideration. We can't quite commit to them yet because we haven't done any real evidence basing or any feasibility study around them, but there's a large number of innovative ideas that we're looking at in the next version of our corporate plan around the next 5 to 7 years, and volunteering and use of specials or PCSOs is right in there. And the other thing too, there shouldn't be too much control freakery from the police around this. There's something about building a capability that is a community safety footprint that the police should certainly be involved in. But you know, when we had more money collectively across local authorities, things like the wardens that Derry City Council had and Belfast City Council, where they were being deployed with the benefit of police analysis and police information, but they weren't actually our employees. And that model could be resurrected if it was seen to be a more efficient way of doing it. Likewise, PCSPs, there's no reason why they couldn't be engaging people in the same way they do around the, sort of, the prevention type role, and the community safety officer role, developing that further into on-the-ground stuff to increase the community safety footprint. Those are all things that we're up for considering, and we're not precious actually about who owns and pays for them or manages them. If we could get collectively and collaboratively increased capability, then that should work for everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Am I allowed to answer a question at some stage?
You can, but just know what you
Oh no!
I want to bring, Bryce, were you looking to come in on Johnny's point, or was it a separate question? It's a separate question. Okay, I'll let you in. Mark.
It strikes me, and this is aimed at the two of you really, sometimes when you're talking about making efficiencies, there are things that you know well could work, but you also know well the public won't understand why and might be reluctant to get on board with them. I'll give the example, as an example of closing police stations.
Oh, what don't mention.
Who brought you?
Specifically about that, but of course, you know, the way crime is reported is less and less is reported by people walking into police stations saying this happened to me. There are so many other vehicles that are being used now, and yet again it becomes a difficult public contentious issue. How do you deal with that when, as in leadership roles that you have, when you know something there's something that you'd like to do that you're convinced would work, but you can already sense that there'll be public reluctance to agree with you?
Sorry, I'm going to ask Anne, not you.
First of all, I mean, over the years, I've closed schools and I've closed libraries, so I'm quite happy to close these stations as well. I think there is a public awareness campaign to be led by the board. I mean, it's always very interesting. Every single night you hear about health, and I have the great sympathy for it. But that's the difficulty. Everybody has sympathy and empathy with the health. Nobody really understands policing. Not even those of us who did all the because we can't, we're not police officers. So I think there has to be, first of all, you produce your facts very clearly and you have proper consultation, which needs to be done. And the facts are that who goes into a police station voluntarily, I should say, in this day and age, very few people I imagine. So and most of them that have closed, nobody's even noticed they're not there. So, but I have a wider, I think I mentioned systemic change earlier, and I think what happened, you mentioned trimming the edges and controlled frequency. And I think there's a little bit of both. If you're going to change an organisation to meet the demands and to do all of the kind of things you're talking about, you do have to do it in a different way. Trimming the edges just means you just keep doing the same thing with less. You can't, you have to have the courage to say we need to do it differently. And I think you have to have the courage to get someone who's not in the organisation to work with you. I'm not talking about a PwC or anything like that. Someone who's maybe been through it, who's got a good track record of having to make change. It's very hard for an officer who's doing a good job to see that they need to change it, particularly maybe senior people. So, you know, we need to change the thinking, we need to look at change management, we need to do it all differently. Because every week there'll be reductions that you have to make. But if you just go in and say, how can we cut that down? And I think there needs to be a more innovative way. For example, if I was doing police station approach, I wouldn't have police officers anywhere near that. I would use some other group of people. Because there's a thing about bringing the public with you, and they're sort of going to say no to the police no matter what they want to do. That is, you know, we have to accept that. But there needs to be a change in thinking about how we change things, and there needs to be different types of work done. And in terms of bringing in people from different backgrounds, we need to be very sure that we're not using highly trained police officers to continue to do jobs that other people could do. Now that's a matter for you, because you don't want to be taking away the skills of the police officer and trying to give it to somebody else. But I think there is a lot more we can do. And we need to have that debate. And to be fair, we haven't had a strong debate at the board about that.
Okay. I'm going to hold yours just because I want to take just a couple of questions from the floor, because I do think we're going to come back to this. I have a question from Linda, one from Bryce, and then one from Barbara.
A couple of it's really just points and sorry, okay. It's really just points, and I don't want to get into a big long discussion with some of the stuff that I'm raising, because we know what the issues are. But we actually had quite a good conversation, myself and Jerry Kelly, with Alan Todd last week around some of this stuff and around some of the innovative ideas, and particularly in terms of the thing that is our big concern, policing with the community. And that then leaves me a little bit concerned in today, in your brief comments, and I know it was probably unintentional, but when you talked about the cost of policing, you talked about the cost of neighbourhood policing is 20 million, and we never talked, and we've raised this with you before, so you're well aware of it, of the cost of the hard end of policing, and that concern is always going to be there for people, that are we sacrificing neighbourhood? It may or may not be the case, but the concern will be there based on the language that's used. Are we sacrificing neighbourhood policing, policing with the community, at the expense of that, what we call the hard end of policing? And I'm not talking about the new stuff around sex crime and, you know, the, I suppose, cyber crime and all of those types of issues. That's not what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about the hard end of policing, we're usually talking about the distance and those kind of issues. So there is always going to be a bit of concern. And my main reason for concern around that is, I'll give an example. We did a meeting last week in Pomeroy where we brought the 2 neighbourhood police officers in, and it's not that long ago you would not have been saying that, that you brought 2 neighbourhood police officers into Pomeroy. But it was an excellent meeting. It was 130 people from the local community at it. The police were very well received in that meeting. The fact that they were there, the fact that they were there to work with the community. And one of the points that we made in the community is, if you have any information on drug dealers, you need to be given it. You need to be passing that information on. So you can deal with bigger issues just by having the neighbourhood officers there, which you would maybe say is the bigger crime or the bigger criminals. So I think that we need to keep that focus there in terms of policing with the community. And I'm not saying it's intentional, but the focus needs to be kept. And just I suppose my other point was in relation to the collaborative working. And there's some good collaborative working, some really, really excellent examples of collaborative working with other agencies, also with the community. But it needs to be right across the board. There needs to be a better focus put on that. And I know the hubs will be used as an example, and in my opinion they're a good idea, and I think they will work well. And we've said this to you before as well. They need to be widened out. The community needs to be part of that. And I know there are issues with that in the first instance around data protection and all that, but they still need to be part of it in whatever way, shape or form that's done. But there are some good examples out there in different guises. Some of them are under neighbourhood renewal and different organisations like that. So I just think that more of a focus needs to be put on that kind of stuff.
Chief Constable.
Well, there's no intention of taking further 20 million out by means of removing all the policing. In fact, the review, the recalibration that we're doing, actually in the back of an HMIC thematic recommendation about neighbourhood policing and what it should look like, is actually going to enhance the neighbourhood policing profile. I could have picked any group, but just happened to be £20 million equated to the number of police officers that we have in neighbourhood policing. There was nothing more than an illustrative example. I agree with you completely around the collaborative working and getting that beyond statutory and formalised voluntary groups into community level and harnessing that community capacity and empowering communities. Absolutely buy that and bought that dream about 15 years ago. The problem that we have around some of that is legislative restraints around data sharing and all the rest of it. It's easy to find the reasons not to do it. We're trying to find the workarounds and the support hubs or the concern hubs, depending on what part of the country you come from or what you call them. I think that is the model to take this forward, and we're working away at that, and I'm happy to do so. It's something that we have been pushing with partners, and thankfully people are now starting to see the benefits of it. And when people start to feel the benefits, then they get more engaged and get more enthusiastic around it. So collaboration has been a really challenging one, but you can't collaborate with yourself really. So it's trying to get willing collaboration partners.
Okay, thank you. Bryce?
Bryce Dixon, I'm an independent member of the Policing Board. And Matt, as well as the financial problems which the police here have that our chair mentioned regarding not having borrowing powers and the power to carry money forward, we have another big difference between ourselves and GB, which is we have a significant past. And you said in your presentation that one of your jobs at the HMI is to comment on whether the PSNI is using the resources that it does have in the best possible way, and is it spending money on things that it shouldn't be spending money on, or vice versa. Could the HMI take a view on whether the PSNI should be, I don't use this word disrespectfully, lumbered with dealing with investigations of incidents that happened 30 and 40 years ago? Because I know that the PSNI gets a bit of extra money from the central government and the local government, and Ireland government, to deal with those issues, but there's no doubt in my mind, and I think in the board's mind, that the PSNI could be much more effective and efficient in dealing with the present if it wasn't obliged to spend so much of its resources on the past.
That's not a unique question for PSNI. I think the scale is certainly unique. But I just dealt with I can't remember the name of it, it was Operation Conifer, which was, you may have seen it in the papers, it was Wiltshire Police's investigation into Tate and the historical child sex abuse allegations against Tate. And the reason it came to me is because I'm the HMIC lead for special grants, and a special grant is when a UK police force gets something extra that happens to it above and beyond its normal duties in policing that's going to cost it more than 1% of its budget. It's allowed to apply to the Home Office for extra money, which is something I understand, as of this morning, is not an option available to PSNI. But as the pressure, as we've talked about, has come on police forces, more and more forces are finding things to apply for special grants for. This is long-winded, but you'll see why I'm going in a minute. What the Home Office then do is, when they get one of these applications, is they send them to us to investigate whether we think the force is, frankly, making a reasonable bid for money, or gold-plating it, over-egging it, being inefficient, not exercising value for money principles, etc., etc. And I remember when this one, which I think was called Conifer, landed on my desk, thinking, oh, crikey, this is going to be contentious, because I know the whole idea of investigating Tate is not universally popular. There's a significant lobby, perhaps led by the Daily Mail, that says that all these things are a waste of money and shouldn't be looked at. And there's also, a pretty strong victims lobby that says it should. I remember thinking and talking with some of my senior colleagues about what to do about this. And what we decided was to be really explicit in what we wrote and say, look, we don't have a view on whether it was even a good idea to do it in the first place. All we're going to concentrate on is, assuming that there was no choice but to do it for Wiltshire Police, did they spend the money sensibly and did they bound it reasonably so that it didn't have the effect that you talk about? It would just be a minefield for us. It wouldn't be appropriate for us to get into a debate about whether these things are worth doing. Where I think it would be appropriate for us to comment is where we can see demonstrable effect on the other responsibilities that the chief has that are caused by that, simply to draw attention to those and highlight what effect they're having, But the question of whether you should or shouldn't, that's just simply not a question for an organisation like mine at all. And without wishing to be blandly uncontroversial, I generally don't have a view.
Chair, perhaps maybe from a board perspective you'd come in, because obviously this, as chair of the board, it's an issue that has come up almost at every board meeting in relation to a policing board established to deal with present day policing, but also managing the legacy of the past.
And as a board, I think we have struggled to get to everyday policing, and the board have more so in the last 2 years. In fact, the board stood down. I thought we got the balance pretty good, but there's no doubt that legacy is really having a knock-on effect on the confidence of people in present-day policing. It is taking a lot of money out of policing budget currently, because there's 2 or 3 operations which the police service are funded in their own budget, which is not satisfactory and is unnecessary, because money has been set aside for legacy. So, my view, and I think the view of most of the board members would be that we need legacy sorted very quickly. That we can't just turn a blind eye to it, but it shouldn't be the remit of the current day policing service to deal with it for a variety of reasons. And we've had several judgments lately that have caused discussion around that. Are they, is the current police service impartial? Irrespective of that, there are so many issues in today's policing. But if you've seen the demand, really, you can see the demand that there is on current police services. We hear the debate about whether police in England and Wales, and indeed here, are fully prepared when they go to prosecute. All of that has been affected by the need for the police to be putting loads and loads of resources into legacy. So I'm very clear that the legacy issues should be sorted, and sorted very, very quickly. And we've made those comments through the powers that be without much success to date.
Okay, thank you. Barbara, we'll take a question from yourself.
Thanks. I have a question around what you, Matt Parr, said at the beginning around fraud. Do you feel it's underreported and underinvestigated, and there'd be a number of other crimes that would be much more widespread? You highlighted that from the fact of the impact when one of these then burst upon the scene, usually in a very difficult and almost crisis manner. I want to ask the question from the other end of it, from the presumption that there are lots of those there at the moment, and how both police and HMIC look at how police services estimate demand. Because I think there's a problem, and it ties in with the question of ties with local communities. That while a lot of the moving on to online or other more specialist requires a specialist service in terms of dealing with the outcome, you still have people at local community levels that are being impacted. And if you're not getting that information through, it's almost as if sometimes your specialist services or your NCA have become the new gatekeepers. They're the ones that feed the information in, that decides what demand is, that decides that the money goes back to the specialist. So for every new version of crime, whether it's child protection or whether it's online, there is a community level input that there needs to be into the assessment of demand. But I don't know how either police or HMIC work on ensuring that happens, because it seems to me that the less police services are being directed to talk to their local communities, the less that they're getting that. So you're getting, say, for child protection, you're getting your information from NCA, but you're not getting it from your local youth worker, and so on and so forth. So you're almost always, you're assessing your demand on the last crisis, as opposed to getting ahead of the curve. And how does HMIC tackle that, and how do police services tackle that?
What a fantastic point. I'm just going to backtrack a little bit on what I said earlier on. I don't know. We are very clear that we only report on evidence, okay? That we only report on the evidence we see. And I've done the exact opposite and said we're doing a study this year, and I expect the findings to be, we don't have the evidence yet. I'm just taking a wild guess that I'm reckoning we're going to find fraud unreported and underreported and underinvestigated. And there are certain clues that we've already seen about the scale, etc. So we're going to see it. But your point about them tending to be, if you like, centrally specialist intelligence led, I think is absolutely true. What do we do about it? There's a one of the projects we have at the moment, we have a rolling programme on crime data reporting, crime data integrity, it's called CDI. And we did a national thematic report into how crime is reported and recorded 3 or 4 years ago, which had some really shocking results. It concentrated on rapes, violent crimes, sexual offences, but I think it really used them just as a totemic kind of, they're the most damaging, and therefore what lessons can you draw from those across the breadth of the nature of crime. And we found that there was an enormous amount of crime being underreported, and I think for the very reasons that you've just articulated. So what? We've been going back to every single force in the UK, 3 or 4 at a time, a constant rolling programme, and we're going into all these forces and spending hour after hour investigating how the force records crime and whether we think they've recorded the right amount of crime, etc., etc. And whereas some forces there's massive variation, and it's all published on our website if anyone wants to read it, but there are forces where we've seen about 67-68% of crime recorded, which is a really low figure. That's thousands of potentially damaging crimes that are just not making it to the record book. Sometimes the police do something, but sometimes they just don't. And so, from our perspective, an increase in recorded crime from HMIC is a good thing. Now, I know that this might not be the way that it's always responded in the community. Oh my God, we've got an increase in recorded crime, the world's dropping in on us. But an increase in recorded crime from our perspective does not indicate sort of increasing lawlessness. It indicates a force that is more rigorous about what it reports. I think, however, that the point you raise about the link, if you like, between community policing and community understanding, and a clear understanding and the nature of breadth of some of these particularly contentious crime types, is one I don't have an answer to. I think, I'm not being flippant, but I think it'd be interesting to see what the Chief says about this, but I think that's a really well-made point. There are some things about the nature of some of those crimes that do lend themselves to online reporting. The way child exploitation online happens means that the NCA-led model is fantastic, and what the NCA, for those who don't be aware, what the NCA tends to do is identifies the people doing it and then sends intelligence packages to all the forces, and then they execute the warrant and do the follow-up. And that's a pretty good model for child online exploitation, but it's not a model for some of the really damaging crime types that you've just talked about as well, which are, as you say, absolutely rooted in the communities.
Chief Constable.
Yeah, I think, first of all, on understanding our demand, that is one of the things specifically that HMI last year looked at, and whilst there's always going to be room for improvement, we had a reasonably good assessment around our understanding of current demand. It's always challenging to do the predictive stuff. Not impossible, and we can do some modelling and we can make some assumptions, and actually be agile enough that if our assumptions are wrong, then we change our resourcing, our capabilities modelling to readjust it if we've got the demand prediction wrong. And I think that's a good challenge, and one that we keep scratching our head about how do we predict future demand. What we do know from the current information that we have and from all the research and the evidence base is that in this organisation there are 3 areas that we need to put front and centre and do the difficult thing of growing the capability whilst the budget shrinks. And those are public protection, cyber crime, and that's online crime and cyber-enabled crime, and also we want to invest more heavily in neighbourhood policing. We made some changes a few years ago in good faith around the neighbourhood policing model. It hasn't been as effective, mainly because of further cuts that have been imposed to us since we came up with the model. So we need to look at another way of our delivery model for local policing and for local demand. So looking ahead, looking at what we currently know and what we can reasonably predict, those are the three areas that we recognise that once our overall budget shrinks, we're going to have to actually grow our capability. And I say capability rather than numbers of people, because it's not just about numbers of people. It might be about investment in IT, about investment in training, about investment in communities in the voluntary sector or other agencies. But we need to build the capability in those three areas now and into the future. I wouldn't want to create the impression. We are grateful for the support from NCA, for example, around public protection issues, and particularly child abuse online. And it would be foolish of us not to take those reports and intelligence packages seriously, because they do come with a high level of reliability and accuracy. That is, the intelligence translates into the evidence and translates into criminal justice outcome. But we will take information, preferably evidence, from whatever source it comes. And that normally means somebody who can talk, write, and sign their name on a statement and go into court to give evidence for us, and that tends to be from communities. So, challenges are valid, Barbara, one that we're open to, and if we need to get better at doing that, we'd love to work with you on it. But please don't think that we have replaced demand prediction or intelligence gathering, or more importantly, evidence gathering from community level and the individual citizen through to some sort of national body or UK body that provides us with helpful information but doesn't actually see, people protected. All they do is provide the information to enable us to take action, and that's just one strand. And the volume of information that we have coming into the system and trying to get the balance between people processing information that allows to keep people safe and actually having people out visible and gathering more information is a real challenge. We've got backlogs in terms of intelligence reports, for example, trying to get them tested, trying to understand the veracity of them, get them onto the system, get them into a usable format so that they can be disseminated to the people that need them to use them. We've actually got backlogs there because we're constantly trying to balance the resource usage between people out there on the street doing the visible service delivery piece and people in the back office doing the processing and the information management piece. And I wish you could say with confidence we've got it right, but it's a constantly moving feast, but one that we take seriously.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Matt, if I could just take you back to your presentation. Whenever you were speaking, you talked about the role that HMI had across the 43 services, and you mentioned specifically a term, gems of genius in other police services. And in a sense, I'm going to ask the Chief after you speak about what gems of genius there are in PSNI, but before I do that, I want to ask you what gems of genius you have found in other UK services.
Let's put me on the spot. Let me give you just one example. Although I work for London Forces, actually I've got a family house. I'll get to it the weekend if I can in Somerset. So my local chief constable is a guy called Andy Marsh, the chief of Avon in Somerset. And because he knew I lived in his force, he said, "Come down and see me. Come down and have a look around the force. We want to show off a little bit of our force to you." So I went down there once. And they have got a phone-based app that their police officers use. Now, you may surprise me, and I don't know enough to say that this has been in use in PSNI for 10 years or whatever. But there's a big shopping centre in Bristol called Cribs Causeway, and the guy demonstrated to me how a patrol officer can go to Cribs Causeway, and on arriving, on his app, he can see all the absconded or wanted people, criminals who were believed to be in Cribs Causeway at the time, because their cars have been recognised by NPR and they've been in the car park. Another swipe shows you a picture of them, what they're wanted for, all on the phone. And they've got their own little IT sort of gem of genius that they're fixing up. Now, amongst the 43, there is an element of not invented here. Kind of, they're always, you see, well, it doesn't really work. It does work, it's brilliant. And it was so intuitive that even somebody a little bit too old and a little bit too inexperienced in policing could work out how to use it really well. It was the most, and it worked. It was really quick and really swift. One of the frustrations I find looking at policing is that that's not everywhere. and police ICT as a whole is a bit of a basket case, but it's not a system that inspires confidence looking across the UK police forces, and it's not one that's got a happy track record. But when you see the bits that really work, it's just frustrating to think that that's not immediately disseminatable across all forces. So you're never going to tell me you've got a better system than that.
Chief Constable, what's your
Gems
gem
of
of
genius
genius?
with his language. There are things that I'm incredibly proud of. I don't know if I'd describe them with those words, but Matt raised the issue of crime data integrity and crime recording, for example. Every force in the UK had their accreditation removed except PSNI because we would be there, and there's integrity around that far outstrips, and that's because of how we've invested in it. Now it's important, but it is just crime recording. So whether or not that's a gem, or whether or not it's genius, or whether it's just still what we should be doing, I'm not sure, but it's something that I'm certainly proud of. Look at what we have invested in around IT, and I don't claim any credit for this because the vision and the drive and the passion for this came from Matt Baggett, the previous chief, around locate. That is us having the IT in place to know where all of our resources are at any time so that we can put the best possible and fastest possible resource to critical issues. I do think there's a challenge for us. We've invested in that. We have it. It is just an IT system. The business processes and our agility and our command and control and dispatching mechanisms and practices, I don't think exploit that. So I'm not calling it a gem of genius. What I'm saying is it's a very good piece of IT and we do use it. And one of the things that Alan's working on is actually working out how we can exploit that further. But that is streets ahead of a lot of what other forces across the UK and certainly the guards have available to them. Mobile data, people can basically, apart from maybe the need to eat, although we've closed most police stations and most canteens, so they don't even need to go back to canteens to do that anymore, but people have on smartphones, state-of-the-art smartphones, all of the facilities available to them to do just about everything. Crime recording, intelligence reporting, intelligence searches, including photographs, fingerprints, that is way in excess of what is available in a lot of other services. In fact, we had just at an executive team planning day an input from the sort of national IT programs lead. So there's 17 IT programs between NPCC, College of Policing, Home Office, 17 programs, and on over half of them we're way ahead of the game because of the investments that we've previously made. The same with ANPR. Our ANPR coverage is better than any other part of the UK, and how we exploit it, often in ways that we have to talk about because we don't want to compromise. Some of the methodology is streets ahead. In fact, one of those programs was talking about a specific capability within ANPR technology that they're developing that we've been using for 4 years. And part of that is because of the challenges that we have around the severe terrorist threat and so on. But there are parts of this organisation and the innovation within it, not just in terms of investment in technology that I think we can be proud of. I think technology is only as good as the people that are using it and the business processes that accompany it, and that is the challenge for us. So there's things that I think that we've invested wisely in and can be rightly proud of, and some of it we are exploiting to the maximum, and other parts of it we haven't, and we just need to make sure that we're getting the full efficiency and effectiveness out of it. So I don't want to be dulling our accolades with too much modesty, but nor do I want to exaggerate it. There's still work to do, but there's things happening in this organisation that are streets ahead of other police services in the UK. And frankly, there are other practices and technologies that we can learn from, and we're standing ready to do that.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of time. We have a few minutes left if we have any final questions. If not, I'm going to ask the panel just if you were to do one thing to optimise resources, what would it be? And I want you to answer it within about 30 seconds or a minute. Just to finish, one thing to optimise resources, regardless of the restrictions around it, what would it be? Matt,
My
maybe you go
incentives,
first.
it would be plan people long term.
And by that you mean, sorry.
I think forces have a tendency to count numbers, not look enough detail at what the capability of their officers is and their staff, and they don't think long and hard enough about what skills they're going to be needing in 5, 10 or 20 years. You employ police officers, you employ them on average for something like 21, 22 years. You need to be really careful about what skills they've got and joining and what capabilities you can be able to give them in the future, because otherwise you'll find yourself with a workforce that is not suited to the tasks that you've got, and you'll be lumbered with it for a long time.
Okay, thank you. Chair?
Mine would be in a similar vein, except it goes back to what I said earlier. I mean, if you want to really change and plan, do forward planning and think differently, there's no point in putting people in the room who think the same, because they'll come up with the same solution. So you really do need to have the courage to bring, and I'm not talking about a consultant who comes in for a day and takes 600 or 1,000 pounds. Someone who really challenges you, has the courage and the authority to do that. So really, but one other thing just to say is the good stuff doesn't get out, ever. You know, and I think that is a trick that we miss. The bad stuff always does. So, you know, there needs to be more awareness raising of the public about, and not just the groups of people who are vociferous and who have never policing. A lot of people out there have no understanding of policing at all. But I come back, I'd say I'd look at the people and get somebody to challenge, because the way we do things is the way we always do them, unless somebody says otherwise.
Okay, thank you. Chief Constable, last word.
We need more agility around our workforce in terms of regulations, in terms of conditions. We hired for historical reasons tied with police staff to Northern Ireland civil service regulations. That's a fettering that doesn't exist in other parts of the UK. Police employees should be police employees of the Chief Constable, and we should have enough flexibility to employ what we need. So, and this isn't just, by the way, about eroding workers' rights or terms and conditions, it could actually be about enhancing them. So a good example is we went through in the late 2000s a process of civilianising in cyber investigations. So we were bringing in young people, largely graduates, well qualified for us to do some top-up training with as cyber investigators and able to analyse computers and all that stuff that I would be rubbish at. But within the civil service rules, we could only pay them at a certain level, and then Liberty IT literally overnight doubled their salary, and we've done the investment. So there's something about workforce retention and allowing the right workforce mix, but being fettered within current staff regulations in terms of conditions is it's a biggie that over the next 5-10 years we're going to need to change. So I say I'd like to change it tomorrow. I think the way the process works, we need a government in place. The way the process works, I think it's going to be a long-term solution to change that, but it is the one single thing that would really allow us to develop capabilities that are more effective and much more efficient, because you end up training police officers in the likes of cybercrime and they don't do a bad job, but actually they end up doing a very narrow band of work, and there would be other people that could do it, coming in with pre-prepared qualifications that would probably do a better job and do it more efficiently, and they would have that would be their career for them, whereas a police officer might go on and specialise for 3 or 4 years. Maybe they'll go into public protection, or maybe they'll go and do the sergeant's exam. It just doesn't feel like a sensible way of building the sort of agile and flexible workforce that we need.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I just finally thank all of you for coming here today and for taking your time out, and for the questions that you've asked of our panel, and just to acknowledge and thank the contribution of Matt and the Chief Constable. Before you go, can I ask you just to be aware that our next seminar is Wednesday the 20th of February, and our guest speaker will be Phil Bowen, the Director of the Centre for Justice Innovation, and he'll be talking about policing and the criminal justice sector and how they can deliver faster and more positive outcomes for victims. And we will also be joined in that panel by our Vice Chair Debbie Waters and Brendan McGuigan from the Criminal Justice Inspectorate. So if you just put that into your diary, and again, thank you very much and safe home. Thank you.